Grandma interview part 2. And we are somewhere around 1950 and gonna move to Fort Wayne.
Yes, that was a big move. And we decided to move there primarily because I wanted to do something in the summertime between my sophomore and junior year and junior and senior year. And I was 15, and at that time, Indiana had a law that you could not do that unless you were 6. You couldn't go to work unless you were 16, unless your parents couldn't afford to keep you otherwise. And Mother said, you can do something educational if you can think of that, but otherwise, no. So the next time I visited Mabel and John in Fort Wayne, 26 miles away, first thing in the educational department I saw was cosmetology school. So I called Warner's Beauty College, and Mr. Warner said, well, you can't be a licensed hairdresser, cosmetologist until you're 17 and a half. And I said, well, I was going to go this summer. And he said, well, you sound like an ambitious young lady. I want to talk to your parents. So he came out, and before he left, I was signed up. And they bought a house 10 blocks from downtown Fort Wayne on busy U.S. highways 30 and 24, and very busy street. And the little dog that I took with me tried to bark at all the cars at first because he was used to that. And everybody got tired of hearing him, and he was on a chain between our house and the house next door. And he barked at the kids, and the kids come by and threw stuff at him.
Oh.
And Daddy said, this can't be. And when I wasn't looking, he took him back to a neighbor's in the country, and that was the last I saw of my Poochie dog.
He was better off.
He was happier in the country because he could chase all the cats he wanted to, and I started beauty school. One thing they told us was never mention in conversation to a client religion of any sort. If they ask you something, you could answer, but otherwise, no.
Yeah.
And that's been a hindrance because I was trained 18 years to do it that way, and it's been a hindrance to my outreach, but that's the way it went. Anyway, one time the teacher said, you got to talk to I was kind of a bashful kid, you wouldn't think it. But I didn't know what to talk to anybody I didn't know about. And the teacher said, you've got lots of things to talk to anybody about. You've got family, you've got weather, you've got a body, and neighbors, and talk about anything that's not going to start a war. But talk.
Yeah.
And I said, but this woman come in, a middle-aged woman, and I didn't have to ask what occupation she was in. You turned hot water on her head, and it smelled like the cow barn. from putting their head in the cow's side to milk it. So anyway, that was the beginning. And by the time I'd been a hairdresser 8 years, and George, my husband, later, that's another story, but he saw a sign on the employment office wall about a job for a cosmetology instructor in an institutional place. And it required you to be able to lecture the board of examiners for 1 hour about any of the 5 topics that we addressed in cosmetology. And somebody said, well, that'd be hard to do. And George said, not for Bonnie. She can talk intelligently for an hour to anybody about anything, whether she really knows anything much about it or not.
That's a good skill to have.
Anyway, I was a hairdresser 18 years, and I enjoyed it tremendously, but I became allergic to all of the stuff that I was working with and had to give it up. And that's when I started doing in-home health care.
Yeah.
How we doing for time?
We're on 6:35.
Okay.
We still got lots of time.
Okay, well, while we were in Fort Wayne, we had this apartment house. And we had students from Indiana Technical College. And they were from every country because they could get a degree there, a Bachelor of Science, in 27 months instead of 4 years. It was a crash course. And at one time we had men from 15 different countries staying in that house at one time. And
Yeah.
they all came in and visited with my daddy. Everybody loved Mom and Pop, they called them.
Yeah.
And for Thanksgiving, we had a Thanksgiving dinner. We had a gas stove in the kitchen. Mother enjoyed the gas stove because she could cook things fast. And one day I had my congealed salads turned out on lettuce leaves on the table. And Mother had pressure cooker giblets and backs and wings and stuff in the pressure cooker. And I went into the pantry to get something. Just when the soft plug in that pressure cooker blew,
Ooh.
and all of the juice from those giblets came up, we had 10-foot ceilings in that house.
Ooh.
Went up 10 feet and dropped back down on my congealed salads. And I can see one of my friends peeking around the corner with big eyes, seeing what happened. But it turned out to be a good dinner without the congealed salads, and the giblets still made dressing, and so it went. One day, there was a man rooming with a man that was had been one of our tenants a year before during the winter season, when he actually lived with his parents 9 months of the year, but in the 3 bad winter months he would get a room in town.
Yeah.
So the second year he was getting a room in town, he had a roommate named George Albert Peters. And George Peters had parked his little 39 Ford with a rumble seat for 2 in front of our house. And this was interesting. And I was in the house, and Mom and Dad had gone to town. And I thought, he's a nice, friendly-looking soul. I'd like to meet him. And here come Mom and Daddy with the week's groceries to carry in. So I go out to help carry in the groceries and started talking to Mr. Peters. And after Daddy'd carried in all the groceries except the bag I was holding, he came back and said, I'll take it in before something else. And that's when I got acquainted with George Peters.
Yep. And he was around a long time.
Yes.
And he moved you to Gate City.
Well, no.
But first you moved lots of other places.
But first, I didn't want to live any place where it snowed. I would go to Florida. My sister was down there. And that's when I moved to Florida. Well, I moved to Florida actually before I met George, and I'd lived down there a couple of winters. And liked it very well, thank you very much. It was easy to get a job as a hairdresser. I had to take a test, of course. And worked in Madeira Beach, which was 5 miles from my sister's house. And she had a 2-bedroom house she bought 2 corner lots, and one house was faced one street, and then she bought another little house that had been a real estate's office and pulled it to face the other street on the other corner. And she built a breezeway between the two of them.
Yeah.
But that little real estate office, she said, that can be your room, Bonnie. Come on down. So that was my living quarters there.
Yeah.
And then after I did meet George, and he was wanting to get married, and I wasn't going to be rushed into anything. And he came down to see if he could find work there. And one winter he worked on the building seawalls.
Yeah.
And he was hollering, let's get married. And I said, no, I'm not getting married now. Haven't known you long enough. And yada, yada. So he went back up north. And
back up in his muddy holler someplace.
No, he went back up to Mom and Daddy, got a room at Mom and Daddy's house.
Oh.
He wasn't far away, and he could, whenever I called Mom and Dad, he could say, I want to talk to her, I want to talk to her. Yeah. So when I came home, well, I thought it'd be nice. Mom and Dad had got married in June, and I thought that'd be nice to get married in June. But I forgot the reason why I postponed it then till September.
Stay tuned to find out about postponing until September. This is wrapping up part 2.